Hi, Ms. Moskowitz here. Welcome to ELA. Today we're going to be reading chapter 3 and continuing it. And the name of the chapter is again, The Dominant Primordial Beast, which means the top leading urges that help you survive and put you at the top of the pack. And as we saw in the last reading, that pack of vicious, hungry dogs came and attacked the sled dog team and ate almost all of their food. There was an outbreak of rabies. So at this point, there's still 7 days away from Dawson in the other direction, but nowhere near their end destination. Okay, so 7 days from the time they pulled into Dawson, they dropped down the steep bank by the barracks to the Yukon Trail and pulled for Dyea and Salt Water. Perot was carrying dispatches, if anything more urgent than those he had brought in. Also, the travel pride had gripped him, and he purposed to make the record trip of the year. Several things favored him to this. The week's rest had recuperated the dogs and put them in through trim. The trail they had broken into the country was packed hard by later journeyers. And further, the police had arranged in 2 or 3 places deposits of grub for dog and man, and he was traveling light. So at this point, they start making good time because he is a mail courier. Along the way, they've left packets of food and extra supplies so that they don't fall completely behind. And this is one of the reasons that they're not dead at this point. Hold on 1 second. All right. They made 60 Mile, which is a 50-mile run on the first day. So at this point, they are booking it and making time. And the second day saw them booming up the Yukon well on their way to Pelly. But such splendid running was achieved, not without great trouble and vexation on the part of Francois. The insidious revolt led by Buck had destroyed the solidarity of the team. It no longer was as one dog leaping in the traces. The encouragement Buck gave the rebels led them all into kinds of petty misdemeanors or crimes. No more was Spitz a leader greatly to be feared. The old awe departed, and they grew equal to challenging his authority. Pike robbed him of half a fish one night and gulped it down under the protection of Buck. Another night, Dub and Joe fought Spitz and made him forego the punishment that they deserved. And even Billy, the good natured was far less good natured and whined not half so placatingly as in former days. Buck never came near Spitz without snarling or bristling menacingly. In fact, his conduct approached that of a bully, and he was given to swearing up and down before Spitz's very nose. So before this, Spitz's leader, full-on leader, but then you had Buck retaliating against him and undermining him by taking the side of the other dogs when they break the rules. Normally, it's Spitz's job to discipline any of these other sled dogs that break out of their roles. So at this point, every time Spitz goes to discipline one of them, Buck interferes. So this means they're getting more and more brazen and rebellious against him. Let's see. Before we start reading the next part, Bedlam was an insane asylum or hospital. So whenever you hear the word Bedlam, it refers to craziness and chaos or lunacy. The breaking down of discipline likewise affected the dogs in their relations with one another. They quarreled and bickered more than ever among themselves, till at times the camp was a howling bedlam. Dave and Sol-Leks alone were unaltered, though they were made irritable by the unending squabbling. Francois swore strange, barbarous oaths, and stampeded the snow in futile rage and tore his hair. His lash was always singing among the dogs, but it was of small avail. Directly his back was turned, they were at it again. He backed up Spitz with his whip, while Buck backed up the remainder of the team. Francois knew he was behind all the trouble, and Buck knew he knew, but Buck was too clever ever again to be caught red-handed. He worked faithfully in the harness, for the toil had become a delight to him. Yet it was a greater delight slyly to precipitate a fight amongst his mates and tangle the traces. So Buck has now become a troublemaker. He's now adapted to life on the trail, and he's one of those dogs who's eager to just go, and he's fully embraced his role as a sled dog. But he also likes to cause trouble. So rather than directly causing the trouble himself, he manages to mess things up, tangle the traces, have the other teammates fighting amongst each other and causing these problems. And this way, he's going to end up getting more respect than Spitz from his teammates and the other dogs. At the mouth of Tahkeena, one night after supper, Dub turned up a snowshoe rabbit, blundered it, and missed. In a second, the whole team was in full cry. 100 yards away was a camp of the Northwest Police, with 50 dogs, huskies all, who joined the chase. The rabbit sped down the river, turned off into a small creek up the frozen bed, for which it held steadily. It ran lightly on the surfaces of the snow while the dogs plowed through by main strength. Buck led the pack 60 strong around bend after bend, but he could not gain. He lay down low in the race, whining eagerly, his splendid body flashing forward, leap by leap, in the wan white moonlight. And leap by leap, like some pale frothed wraith or ghost, the snowshoe rabbit flashed on ahead. All that stirring of old instincts which at stated periods drive men from the sounding cities to forest and plain to kill things by chemically propelled leaden bullets, the bloodlust, the joy to kill, all this was Buck's, only it was infinitely more intimate. He was ranging at the head of the pack, running the wild thing down, the living meat, to kill with his own teeth and wash his muzzle in the eyes in warm blood. So Buck feels the need to hunt, to kill, and he's just been taken over by this impulse. And the rabbit has triggered it to the utmost degree. So there is an ecstasy or joy that marks the summit of life, and beyond which life cannot rise. And such is the paradox of living. This ecstasy comes from one is most alive, and it comes to a complete forgetfulness that one is alive. This ecstasy, this forgetfulness of living, comes to the artist caught up and out of himself in a sheet of flame. It comes to the soldier, war mad on a stricken field and refusing quarter. It came to Buck leading the pack, sounding the old wolf cry and straining after the food that was alive and that fled swiftly before him through the moonlight. He was sounding the deeps of his nature and the parts of his nature that were deeper than he, going back into the womb of time. He was mastered by the sheer surging of life, the tidal wave of being, the perfect joy of each separate muscle, joint, and sinew, in that it was everything that was not death, and that it was a glow and rampant expressing itself in the moment, flying exultantly under the stars and over the face of dead matter that did not move. So at this point, what he's talking about is this almost Zen experience where at the very moment that Buck is most alive, there's this paradox. Because in order to be that alive in the moment, you have to be separated from your thought and in tune with your most primal nature. So at this height of Buck fully being part of the planet, part of the chain of life, and experiencing this is also the moment that he's forgotten himself in it. So there's this disconnect between this experience, this intimate experience of the moment, and your ability to experience it because you're so in the moment that your analytical mind isn't processing things in the way it might normally. So at this point, Buck is completely, solidly in the moment. He's not thinking of the past. He's not thinking of the future. He's not scheming. He's not plotting. He's chasing the rabbit. But Spitz, cold and calculating, even in his supreme moods, left the pack and cut across a narrow neck of land where the creek made a long bend around. Buck did not know of this, and as he rounded the bend, the frost wraith of a rabbit still flitting before him, he saw another and larger frost wraith leap from the overhanging bank into the immediate path of the rabbit. It was Spitz. The rabbit could not turn, and as the white teeth broke its back in midair, it shrieked as loudly as a stricken man may shriek. At the sound of this, the cry of life plunging down from life's apex in the grip of death, the fall pack at Buck's heels raised hell's chorus of delight. Buck did not cry out. He did not check himself, but dove in upon Spitz, shoulder to shoulder, so hard that he missed the throat. They rolled over and over in the powdery snow, and Spitz gained his feet almost as though he had not been overthrown, slashing Buck down the shoulder and leaping clear. Twice his teeth clipped together like the steel jaws of a trap. As he backed away for lighter, better footing, with lean and lifting lips that writhed and snarled. In a flash, Buck knew it. The time had come. It was to the death, and as they circled about, snarling, ears laid back, keenly watchful for the advantage, the scene came to Buck with a sense of familiarity. He seemed to remember it all: the white woods, the earth, the moonlight, and the thrill of battle. Over the whiteness and silence brooded a ghostly calm. There was not the faintest whisper of air, nothing moved, not a leaf quivered, the visible breaths of the dogs rising slowly and lingering in the frosty air. They had made short work of the snowshoe rabbit. Can you feel in all of this imagery the supreme tension and the waiting and the buildup of this moment? And they were not drawn up in an expectant circle. They too were silent, their eyes only gleaming and their breaths slowly drifting upward. To Buck, it was nothing new or strange, this scene of old time. It was as though it had always been the wanted way of things. Spitz was a practiced fighter from Spitzbergen through the Arctic and across Canada and the Barrens, and he held his own with all manner of dogs and achieved to master over them. Bitter rage was his, but never blind rage. In passion to rend and destroy, he never forgot that his enemy was in like passion to rend and destroy. He never rushed till he was prepared to receive a rush, and he never attacked till he had first defended the attack. In vain, Buck strove to sink his teeth in the neck of the big white dog. Wherever his fangs struck for the softer flesh, they were countered by the fangs of Spitz. Fangs clashed fangs, and lips were cut and bleeding, but Buck could not penetrate his enemy's guard. Then he warmed up and enveloped Spitz in a whirlwind of rushes. Time and time again, he tried for the snow-white throat, where life bubbled near the surface, and each time and every time, Spitz slashed him and got away. Then Buck took to rushing, and as though for the throat, when suddenly, drawing back his head and curving in from the side, he would drive his shoulder at the shoulder of Spitz as a ram by which to overthrow him. But instead, Buck's shoulder was slashed down each time as Spitz leapt lightly away. Spitz was untouched, while Buck was streaming with blood and panting hard. The fight was growing desperate, and all the while the silent and wolfish circle waited to finish off whichever dog went down. As Buck grew winded, Spitz took to rushing, and he kept him staggering for footing. Once Buck went over, and the whole circle of 60 dogs started up, but he recovered himself, almost in midair, and the circle sank down again and waited. But Buck possessed a quality that made for greatness: imagination. He fought for instinct, but he could fight by head as well. He rushed as though attempting the old shoulder trick, but at the last instant swept low in the snow and in. His teeth closed on Spitz's left foreleg, and there was a crunch of breaking bone, and the white dog faced him on three legs. Thrice he tried to knock him over, then repeated the trick and broke the right foreleg. Despite the pain and helplessness, Spitz struggled madly to keep up. He saw the silent circle with gleaming eyes, lolling tongues, and silvery breaths drifting upward, closing in upon him as he had seen similar circles close in upon beaten antagonists in the past. Only this time, he was the one who was beaten. The word inexorable means unstoppable. At this point, Buck has become unstoppable. He has outsmarted Spitz, and Spitz has never experienced this before. There was no hope for him. Buck was inexorable. Mercy was a thing reserved for gentler climbs. He maneuvered for the final rush, and the circle had tightened till he could feel the breath of the huskies on his flanks. He could see them, beyond Spitz and to the other side, half crouching for the spring, their eyes fixed upon him. A pause seemed to fall, and every animal was motionless as though turned to stone. Only Spitz quivered and bristled as he staggered back and forth, snarling with horrible menace as though to frighten off impending death. Then Buck sprang in and out, but while he was in, shoulder had at last squarely met shoulder. The dark circle became a dot on the moon-flooded snow as Spitz disappeared from view. Buck stood and looked on, the successful champion, the dominant primordial beast who had made his kill and found it good. One second, my computer's about to shut. How do you feel about Buck now? After all, like, do you think that he deserved to overthrow Spitz in this fashion? So, one of the things to think about in the moment is how vivid this image is of Spitz being in this vicious fight with Buck while you have all the other dogs circled around. All these dogs that have been trailing after this snowshoe rabbit are just in a giant circle under the moon and in the snow. And so at this point, has Buck really claimed full leadership of this pack? And how has he changed since the beginning of the story? So now that we're through chapter 3, one of the things you should be thinking about is how Buck is transformed from just automatically having this role as top dog because he was on a farm with all these little tiny dogs versus earning this role of top dog and leader. Okay. End of the lesson. Have a great day.